Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Garden Hour, brought to you by SDSU Extension each week at this hour. I am Rhoda Burrows, SDSU Extension Horticulturist, and I will be your host this evening. Tonight's panelists will include Adam Varenhorst, SDSU Extension Entomologist. Adam, what will you be sharing with us tonight? If you can unmute and show yourself if you're going to.
I'm working on that, having some technical difficulties. I was out at the Southeast Research Farm field day today, so haven't had a lot of time to troubleshoot. But tonight I'll be talking a little bit about squash vine borer, and then a little bit on cabbage white butterflies and anything else people are seeing that they have questions about insect-wise.
Sounds like it will be good information. Christina Lind, long-term McCrory Garden staff and now horticulture outreach consultant for Macquarie Gardens, is going to share with us tonight what's blooming at McCrory. Christina.
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, I'm excited to share what's going on at McCrory. There's some upcoming events, and there's also just some amazing, beautiful flowers blooming, and the annuals are really full. So I'll be excited to show you some pictures of that.
We look forward to it. And then John Ball, SDSU Extension Forester and South Dakota State Forest Health Specialist. John, what do you plan issues are you going to be talking about tonight?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to be talking about the continual drought. Though it's raining here in Brookings right now, we'll take every inch of it. But the drought is affecting all the states, so I'm going to go over a little bit more details of that. And of course, we still have pest problems. So pear slug is out, and I'll be chatting about that as well this evening.
All right. We will get started then, and I am going to start by talking tonight about some tomato issues. But first, we're going to start with what can you plant in your garden now? Yeah, let's get this to, there we are. So if you have taken out some early season crops, maybe your spinach went to seed or your arugula, you've pulled some radishes, and now you have some empty space. You can fill that in, or if you're like me and didn't get a whole lot planted earlier this year, you can still go out and plant some things. I actually planted beans this past week. We can plant those probably this week yet, and then we're probably past the time to do that. But there are some other crops that we can get in yet as well. Some of the cool season crops like beets and turnips through mid-July, peas yet. I'll probably go home and plant some this week sometime yet. Carrots, especially the smaller ones, through mid-July, and even summer squash if you've got one of those varieties that's only 48 or 50 days. Now, of course, this will depend upon where in the state you are. So those on the southern side of the state can plant for longer than somebody up by Aberdeen or Mobridge or in that area. It also, of course, is going to depend upon when we get that first frost. And as you know, we can get it anywhere from, in the time I've spent in South Dakota, anytime from August 20th through Halloween, pretty much. So oftentimes we do see that we get that mid-September frost, and then it warms up for another month. So if you've got a way to throw some protection over your crops in mid-September or so, often you can keep those going for longer. So here are some options for planting at this point. I want to talk some about curling tomato leaves, because I've been getting a lot of calls of people saying my tomato leaves are curling up, and it's hard to know exactly what's going on without a photo or sample, because there are a lot of actually different ways that a tomato leaf can curl. On this slide, I have two different ways that tomatoes can curl up. And this is simply rolling up. The leaves are not distorted in terms of if you took one of these leaves and flattened it out, it would be a normal looking leaf. But they're curling up from trying to protect their water supply. So as they curl up, that has much water from evaporating from the leaves. So we've got two different causes here. On the right hand side, I've got a couple photos of just stress caused leaf roll. So that may happen when it gets hot and maybe windy, and once the plant is watered, or especially has gone through the cool, more moist overnight, in the morning when you go out, it should probably be unrolled if it's a stress caused leaf roll. On the other hand, we do have some viruses that can cause leaf rolling. Pretty unusual in South Dakota to see this, but I put in a photo just so that you could see what it might look like. And you'll notice the difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side there. We actually have some discoloration on the left side, so some purpling of the leaves, whereas with stress-caused leaf roll, you don't see discoloration, you don't see chlorosis. If you do see chlorosis, maybe something else is going on as well, but normally a green leaf. With viruses, the one that we see most often in South Dakota is tomato spotted wilt virus. And viruses can be fairly difficult to diagnose. So that's one to send us a sample. Sometimes I have to send it to the disease clinic in Brookings so that they can actually run laboratory tests to tell me what it is. Now, this is a different kind of leaf curling, and this is one that we probably see more often than any other kind of curling in South Dakota, and that's caused by herbicide damage. On the left, we have 2,4-D damage, and on the right, we see dicamba damage. You see that they're very similar in their effects. Here, if we tried to unroll one of those tightly rolled leaves, we wouldn't be able to make a normal leaf out of it. The actual leaf margins are distorted. And we can see anything from a mild case of that with just the margins looking a little funky to, these real tight curled balls that tell you it got a pretty good hit. Both 2,4-D and dicamba are in common lawn herbicides, so be very careful with that. 2,4-D, we usually see damage from drift at the time of the spray. So both of these are also field herbicides, so it could come from either source. Dicamba, on the other hand, you may get it at the time of application, but dicamba, as you've probably heard, can be applied at a good time, sit down on the field or on your lawn, and then when it gets hot, can volatilize and drift over to your plants. So you can get damage even if you applied it correctly, but still have some issues with it. So we see a lot of either of these, or it may actually be both at the same time. The other thing I wanted to talk about tonight that I see a lot on social media and on questions about tomatoes is nutrient deficiencies. And I wanted to show you kind of the difference between two different nutritional deficiencies here. On the right-hand side is nitrogen deficiency, and that's probably our most common nutrient problem, other than calcium with blossom end rot. That's kind of a whole different ball of wax. But with gardens that haven't had a whole lot of fertilization, we may see this yellowing, particularly of older foliage. the plant is able to move nitrogen around in the plant, and it wants to keep growing. So it will grab the nitrogen out of lower leaves, older leaves, and transport it to the growing point. So with nitrogen, we look at the lower leaves first to see that chlorosis or yellowing. The yellowing is also fairly general across the leaf. You don't really see a pattern much within the leaf. The whole leaf will just sort of be a general yellowish color. So that's nitrogen. On the left-hand side, instead, we have magnesium deficiency. And one thing that you'll notice right away is that it's yellow between the veins. Now, you may have recall earlier in the season, we talked about iron chlorosis, and that also has yellow between the veins with green veins. So the two could be confused. If you look real closely, many of the fine veins, those smaller veins, are still green. With iron chlorosis, more often we don't see those really fine veins staying green. So that can be a fine distinction. You might have to have the two side by side to actually see that. Magnesium deficiency also will tend to show up in the older foliage, not in the growing point, whereas with iron chlorosis, you would see that in the growing point first. So what do you do about magnesium deficiency? Well, one of the things I've been hearing or seeing a lot on various sites is the recommendation with yellow foliage to spray with Epsom salts. Epsom salts is actually magnesium sulfate. So if you had symptoms like the leaves on the left, that would be a good solution. However, in most of South Dakota, we have enough magnesium in our soil. And if you get too much magnesium, that can interfere with the uptake of calcium and the movement of calcium through the plant, which could end up giving you more blossom end rot. So you want to be careful about applying magnesium. We had a student a number of years ago do an experiment over the summer, one summer, applying magnesium to tomatoes and found no difference between those that had magnesium or Epsom salts and those that didn't. I have seen magnesium deficiency a couple times, mostly in high tunnels or greenhouses where the soil was being used very intensively. I have never seen it actually out in the field or out in the garden. So if you've seen yellowing, look for the green veins. If it's lower foliage, it probably could use some nitrogen. With that, do we have any questions? My white mini pumpkin plants are growing nicely, and there are many yellow blossoms on the vines. It sounds colorful. I'm seeing several white pumpkins developing. Should I be concerned about too many yellow blossoms per vine? If it's mini pumpkins, I wouldn't worry too much about taking any extra fruit off. If you're wanting, to develop a large pumpkin, then you might take off some of the extra fruit. But as long as there are many ones and you like those cute little ones, it's fine to leave them. Best practices for voles. We'll leave that for later in the show. I'll let the panelists think about it. With that, if we have no further questions, or did I miss one here? There's one for John Ball later in the show, so I'll pass this over to Adam, and he's going to talk about some insects.
All right. Looks like I got my technology working, so.
Okay.
So I want to just let everyone know I am a field crop entomologist, but gardening is a hobby. And so I tend to see a lot of the insects that are out in the garden and put together some stuff that I thought might be pertinent based on what I'm seeing. So Rhoda, you can go to the next slide.
Oops, I think I went to there. Is that
There
the
we
right
go.
one?
Yep. So one of the insect pests that I never had an issue with until I moved to South Dakota, and specifically to Brookings, were squash vine borers. And I'm guessing my neighborhood has a very good population of these because it's been an issue for the last few years. And if you have any squash, so zucchini are a favorite of these, as well as pumpkins, watch your plants. If you don't notice these moths, which are pretty easy to identify, then you probably don't have squash vine borers. If you're out scouting though, typically somewhere between noon and 6 p.m. is when I see these being most active. And you see these moths or you hear something buzzing around the zucchini, but don't really see bees in the flowers, try to look around and see if you can find the moth. They do resemble a bee or wasp pretty well. Most people consider them to look a lot like a wasp. That's due to that orange coloration on their bodies. And you can't see it in my picture here, but they also have clear hind wings. And that's the family of moths that they're in. And so they do resemble a wasp quite a bit, especially if you hear them buzzing around. So the adults are active right now and the females are laying eggs. They lay their eggs at the base of the stems. Rhoda, you can go to the next slide. And the eggs are pretty small, but they are visible. They're going to be a kind of a orangish brown color. And the eggs will almost always be right at the soil surface level on the stem. Now, as you can see in this picture, there are quite a few eggs there. And one of the options for management is to actually go through and pick those off the stem and crush them and destroy them. However, if you have a large garden with a lot of zucchini or pumpkin plants, that won't be very feasible. But we do get into another issue though. If we don't do anything about this pest, they do have the potential to destroy the produce or the plant also. So Rhoda, you can go to my next slide. And here are the larvae of the squash vine borer. Typically, we don't see these. They'll be actually burrowed into the stem of the plant, feeding, or they'll be burrowed into the produce. So I've seen these, typically I think you need a pretty large population for this to happen, but I've had these in my zucchinis and I've had them in pumpkins. And once they get into the produce, it's pretty much game over for whatever produce that is, because they don't tunnel that much, but when they are in the crop, the produce, they actually allow other pathogens to get in. And so eventually it starts to rot pretty quickly. And so if you have it in pumpkins, they won't last very long. You can go to my next slide. And so here are some pictures of what those larvae look like when they're actually feeding in the produce. Now you can imagine if they're in the stem, they're going to be doing something very similar. We probably won't see too much of it right now, but when they're really active in the stems of the plants, it'll almost look like there's sawdust coming out of those stems. And one of the issues we have with these plants, zucchinis, pumpkins, that family of plants, is that they typically have very big leaves and the stems are normally very difficult to get to. But one of the things we do need to do is try to keep those areas healthy and also squash vine borer free. You can go into my next slide. So for squash vine borers, if you look through, do a Google search, there's going to be different options for management. One of the things which is too late to do this year is to plant an early crop and then plant a second crop sometime in late June, early July. And the whole idea there is that if you plant early, those will probably get hit, but then you can remove them after you get some, harvest them a little bit. The late planting will actually miss when those adults are flying. Unfortunately, we don't all have large enough gardens to do that. So what are some other options? Well, we can try to bait and trap these moths, which is not easy to do. There are pheromone baited sticky cards that you can purchase online, and they're just a little white card that has a lure that you stick in it. And then the whole idea is that the moths fly in, they get trapped on the sticky substance, and the surface, and then they can't fly back out. Something I've been playing around with because I didn't think the sticky cards were working well enough is I actually purchased some European corn borer traps, and I put the lures in those because the whole idea with those traps, and I wish I would have had a picture for it, is that you can actually place them over. So imagine a big circle being placed over your plant and it's mesh. And so if the moth flies up towards the lure, it gets trapped, and then there's a little container up on top that catches them and they can't get back out. So far, that method of trap is actually working the best for me. I tried another option that's noted everywhere in the literature is to use a yellow bucket with water, soapy water inside, because if they fly in, they won't be able to fly back out, and the moths are attracted to yellow. However, I haven't had any success with that option. So far, it seems like the best thing I can see is using those. If you know that you have them out there and you can't keep up with the eggs, try to reduce the adult population a little bit, maybe by the lures. One thing I will note, though, is that when you put a pheromone lure in your yard, and it's just like if you have any other pests like Japanese beetles, there are the Japanese lures with the little traps, you're probably attracting the moths from the entire neighborhood into your yard. So that's one of the things to consider. So I mentioned removing the eggs. Another thing is if you regularly till your garden, make sure you till deep in the areas where you had infested plants. Also, as soon as you start to see a plant having the symptoms of an infestation, so it's going to be wilting, you're going to see the sawdust, pull it out by the roots and destroy it. So not throw it in the compost area of your garden. Don't just pull it out. It needs to go away from the garden and be destroyed. Another option for management is actually consider planting some Hubbard squash in your garden. They're actually kind of a trap crop. So the squash vine borer love these things, and they'll actually go to them, and then you can remove the Hubbard squash once they're heavily infested. Something else I didn't put on here because I don't normally like to push insecticides in a garden, because we typically, that goes straight from garden to plate a lot of times, are insecticides. So if you know you're going to have a problem, insecticide powder is probably the best option for you for the squash vine borer. And that's because we can't really time it perfectly for when those eggs hatch and when the larvae are going to start boring into the plant. So by powdering the base of the stems, that can slow down those larvae. And then if they hatch, they're going to be poisoned once they do hatch. So those are the options for management for squash vine borers. To give you guys an idea, I have 6 of my traps out in my garden, and each day I'm catching around 15 squash vine borer moths in each trap. So very large population where I'm at. I know I've seen some posts on social media of other people in South Dakota seeing these. And so it's something, though, that once it gets established, it seems to really persist. Rhoda, you can go to my next slide. And then another pest that I'm seeing quite a bit in my garden right now are cabbage white butterflies. And so although the butterflies aren't really the issue, it's their caterpillars that are. And so when you see the moth activity, start looking at your cabbages, your kales, anything in that family, because as you can see in these pictures, the caterpillars can pretty quickly remove all of the leaf tissue from a plant. Now, the best thing to do for the cabbage white butterfly is also known as imported cabbage worm caterpillars is to monitor. If you see the moths flying, check the plants for eggs. If you don't see those, wait until you see the caterpillars, hand remove those. If you get to the point like this picture down in the bottom right of the screen, probably need to consider an insecticide powder. So this was actually from my garden a couple years ago. I let things get pretty severe because I was curious, based on the populations I was seeing, how fast they could defoliate a plant. Fortunately, I had plenty of other kale, so I wasn't out of kale, but in about 3 or 4 days with these large caterpillars, these were getting close to where they'd stop feeding, but they can remove a lot of leaf tissue. Now, if you're seeing a lot of other green caterpillars, one of the things that you can look at for are that the cabbage white butterfly caterpillars are going to have tons of little hairs on their bodies. And if you look at that picture on the left, there's also a faint yellow line. It's kind of hard to see in the picture, but it's pretty easy to see with the naked eye, that runs from their head all the way to the end of their body. And so that's going to be very helpful in identifying them. Also, they're larger. So some of our other caterpillars that can show up on kale and kale relatives tend to be a little smaller. And so that's one of the other ways to determine if you have these or not. But otherwise, insect pest wise, I have seen some spider mites showing up here and there. And so the best thing to do for spider mites is to mist your plants in the evening, get that humidity level up around the leaves, and then just kind of monitor everything else. But sometimes we see some other pests showing up in some parts of South Dakota. If you're in the central part of the state, you might want to start watching for grasshoppers, because pretty soon they'll be causing some major problems. Last year, we had pictures sent to us towards mid-August where entire gardens had been wiped out and the leaves off the trees had been fed on. And looking at the way things are going right now, we're probably going to see similar grasshopper populations. But I'm sure John can talk a little bit more about if you get grasshoppers in your trees. But if you have them in your garden, they're kind of a tough thing to manage, because grasshoppers move around a lot, and it takes a lot of insecticide to really knock the population down. So it's one of those tough pests to really get a management strategy in place for. So that's all I have for you guys tonight.
I'm gonna unmute myself. We have a question that might be sort of open for grabs. I continue to have a difficult time growing eggplant here in Brookings at the community gardens. I've not seen any bugs on them, but the leaves have been eaten. Any advice?
I guess, Christina, if you could tell us what size the holes are, that might help us. If they're really small, little, almost look like little pinpoint holes, that could be due to flea beetles. If it's larger holes, however, it could be due to a caterpillar, or Brookings is starting to see some grasshoppers. It might be grasshoppers as well. And if you're not seeing the pests around, it could be the grasshoppers, because they'll move from plant to plant quite fast. And especially if you're out there looking at them, they'll kind of jump off the plant and to evade you. So that would be my best guess, is that it's grasshoppers.
You see that she does say larger holes, and she has seen some grasshoppers out there. So I imagine we'll be hearing a lot about those as the season progresses. I have one for you, Adam. If I see a small white butterfly out in my yard, is it likely to be a cabbage butterfly, or are there any other white butterflies?
Right now, if it's all white like the picture, probably the cabbage white butterfly. There are going to be a few others. Typically, they'll have a little bit of blue and gray on them though, and they'll be much smaller. But anytime I see something white fluttering around in my garden, I run out and look, and most of the time it is the cabbage white butterfly. They love gardens, so that's kind of my rule of thumb, is if it's not in the garden, it might be something else, but in the garden, it's probably the cabbage white butterfly. And it's amazing how they can track down kale and other relatives in that family, because it doesn't matter where you put them, that they will find them.
Thank you, Adam. I think we'll turn it over now to Christine to hear about Macquarie Gardens. And let me get up your pictures, Christine. Oh, there's Adam's contact information if any of you want to have a further conversation with Adam. His office number and his email are there. Okay, Christine, over to you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Yeah, again, I'll just be sharing some things happening at McCrory, and I updated my background with a photo of McCrory today. So you can see the annuals are really filling in and looking beautiful. They sure did a wonderful job at color combinations and plant combinations at the gardens this year. So if you're, just looking for inspiration, even of what you would like to do for your annual beds and design ideas, they did a really wonderful job with that this year. And this is the President's Garden for anyone who might be familiar with that space, our favorite space. Some things happening. We have, again, our children's activities, garden party, save the date for that on August 6th. We have a lot of things going on actually for that. We have coffee in the morning. We have some tours. We have yoga going on in the gardens that day from Prairie Soul Studio is doing some yoga in the morning. And there's some different kinds of music and food trucks and a commemoration. The entire garden party is dedicated to Norm Evers, who was a previous director of the gardens and runs that Norm's there by Aurora, who passed earlier this year. And we're dedicating the garden party to him. So there's a commemoration to that. I think that's about 6 o'clock, and then ice cream and all that fun stuff will follow that. So definitely stay tuned to those. Our insect festival in September. And then coming up sooner on the here is July 13th. We have Christine Stewart Nunez doing a poetry reading of some of her own published works of poetry. So she'll be doing that in the gardens, and I'm really excited for that. I think that'll be a fun thing to just come sit and enjoy in the gardens. Pre-registration is required, but they will take registration at the door, and so if you just come on the day, they'll be able to register you there at the door. But ahead of time, if you're able to do that, is great too. One thing to note is to bring your own lawn chair or blanket, because there won't be seating available. So bring your own kind of seating to just sort of picnic out in the gardens and listen to some of her wonderful poetry out in the gardens there on July 13th, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. It is free and free admission to come to that as well. So stay tuned to that on Facebook or call into the visitor center too. So you can go on to the next slide. I'll just hit on a few things that are blooming. The lilies, oh my goodness, the lilies. If you do follow our social media, you might have seen some of our photos. I just put 2, but I took probably 30 and I just didn't want to show you a zillion photos of lilies, but they are really, really pretty. So we have our lily collection, and then they're sort of staggered and scattered throughout the gardens as well. So absolutely, if you are a lily person, come and check out the lilies. I did have the variety of that one there is golden stargazer, that yellow one, and it's tall. Oh my goodness, it's probably 4 to 5 feet tall, but there's a lot of different heights of the lily. So it's a great time to enjoy those. You can go to the next one, please. So the purple prairie clover, oh, I love this plant every year. It's a South Dakota native. So out on the prairie at our farm, it's blooming too. It's just like it's a native plant to this area. So it grows wonderfully. It's great for habitat. You can see this little bumblebee is loving it. He was buzzing all around all of these flowers. You can just see his little pollen sacs are all loaded up on his back legs, that bright orange or dark orange. I couldn't decide if I wanted the bee or the flower to be the star of this picture, because there's so many things going on. You can see the purple prairie clover, how it's kind of got this purple like bottle brush with the orange little tips all the way around, and it's so vibrant and really, really a lovely plant. And it's blooming out kind of in our shortgrass prairie planting. The Prairie is my garden out in the parking lot, as well as a couple spots inside the garden in our prairie areas. So next slide, please. So, oops, I did leave. I was wondering that up on the top left, linum, it is not purple prairie clover because you just saw that. For some reason, I thought I remembered, I forgot to change that name, but it's blue flax. So blue flax is blooming right now too. And just a really nice little blue color in the garden. You don't always see that color in a nice perennial plant. And then just a couple other ones. The Anthemis tinctoria, the dyer's chamomile. It's kind of a newer one for us, but you can use it to dye fabrics. We did that in one of our workshops last year, which was really fun, but it's also just really beautiful. It's just kind of this mat of yellow daisy-like flowers. And then I just liked this combination. So I took a picture of the two of them together with there's all kinds of different yarrows blooming. But this is some kind of specific cultivars that have been introduced recently. And those vibrant kind of pinks and purples and reds are really nice. So I like looking for some of those kind of newer cultivars of the yarrows too. We can go on to the next one, please. So gallardias, different species of gallardias, like we have our blanket flower. This one is just a really lovely example of one of them. And there's just a plethora of them blooming throughout the gardens, you know, the Arizona sunsets and the all kinds of different varieties of them. But they're all kind of a really nice perennial to see blooming in the gardens. And again, so much more. There's just a lot blooming kind of all throughout the garden. So definitely come tour it, take a look at everything, or take some inspiration for some things that you'd like to plant at your own home. All of these I think are really nice options for your home as well. So does anybody have any questions or anything for me?
You know, I like the purple prairie clover for its scent. It's got such a fresh smell to it, I think.
Yes, it's definitely a favorite of mine, and I would recommend to anyone to plant the purple prairie clover in your garden. It's not a super long bloom time, but it's worth it. And then it just kind of has a nice little kind of ferny foliage to blend in with everything the rest of the year. So all right.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks for having me.
Forward to seeing what's happening. And I'm, you know, every week you have these wonderful pictures, and I'm kind of regretful that I'm across the state, so I can't see any of these.
Yeah, well, you get to share them and see them in this way, and maybe they'll entice you to make a trip over. Yeah. Wow. So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Ball.
All right, well, thank you. And we'll start out with this first picture, which is not a surprise to anyone. What you're looking at here is a recently planted, that's kind of important term, a recently planted shagbark hickory. And the reason I say recently planted is that if they've been in the ground 5 years or so, they're actually very drought tolerant. And we have them on campus here with completely green leaves, glossy green leaves that look gorgeous in areas which are not being irrigated. Our campus has some areas that are and some areas that are not. Now, this tree is receiving water, but you almost can't water them enough when they've been newly planted trees. When you combine the high heat we've had and the low soil moisture, you almost need an IV for these trees this year. You know, ideally you're giving a 1 to 2 inch tree 1 or 2 gallons almost every other day right now, in order to keep them alive even. With mature trees, we are seeing across the state a lot of trees, mature trees that look just like this picture too. Hackberry trees are already beginning to drop their leaves. I'm getting calls from people saying the ground is littered with little hackberry leaves, as well as a number of other species. Pines, the older needles are turning yellow and are beginning to be shed prematurely. I expect to start seeing that on spruce as well if this continues. So a lot of the problems that I'm going out and looking at right now, and people say, well, what do I spray? It's, as you've heard me before, H2O, not on the plant, but on the soil, and give them all a good soak it as much as you can. What I really like to see is going out and seeing trees with a bright green ring around them in an otherwise brown lawn, because they're not watering their lawn, and that's a turf issue, but I know they're watering their trees. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of people, there's not enough people out there that either have the time or resources to water. I understand it's kind of tough to do, but I can't overemphasize this is really critical to be doing right now. So if you can get out and water, please do so. If you're in Brookings right now, it's been raining off and on all day, so we may be getting another ½ inch or an inch or so, and we'll certainly take it. I think that storm ran across the state, so hopefully everybody got a little reprieve. But in the perfect world, the world we do not live in, trees would be receiving about an inch of rain a week right now, and they're not getting it. But keep in mind, most of the trees we plant are from the eastern deciduous forest, where an inch a week would be pretty much normal. And so when we plant them out here, they really require supplemental irrigation during dry summers, as we're seeing this year. So that's my continual plead to go out there and water your trees if at all possible, particularly if you start noticing some leaves that are looking like this. Next picture, please. If we can get Rhoda, there we go. But you know what? We are seeing signs of summer. Right now, the pear slugs, as we call them, they're actually a sawfly. They're not a slug. They're not a little snail-like critter out there. They are an insect. And the pear slugs, I noticed just this last week, are out there what we call window painting. They're out there feeding on the leaf tissue between the veins on the upper leaf surface. So when you look at them, they kind of look like little window panes to it. And they really don't kill plants. But when you get these purple leaf sand cherries, which they just love to feed on, as well as many other cherries and plums, and I guess pear, they really can make the leaves look pretty bad. And a lot of these ornamentals are going to show that for it. And again, not something we really like to see. Now, when they're this tiny, I'd go back to the Adams School of Pest Management, and a high pressure stream of water will knock these little guys off and they won't be able to find their way back on. So you might consider that another use of a valuable resource, water. However, these are easily killed by most insecticides. Read and follow label directions, but applied now when they're really tiny doesn't really take a lot of insecticide. And if you are going to treat these, now would be the time to go out and take a look if you find them on your plants. Because if you wait until they've completely window paned the leaf, that's really what we call revenge spraying. They've done their damage and you're treating them now. And it's really not going to have any impact on next year because the adults fly. So they can still bring them in from somewhere else. So really, in a lot of cases now, our treatments are over for a lot of pests, but there are a few that are just beginning, and this would be one of them. I might add too that it seems like our season's advancing a little faster than what we typically have. We have some trees that I'll show next week that are beginning to bloom. Ammermachias, for example, about 2 weeks early. They normally bloom at the end of July, and they're flowering now, which really took me by surprise because this is quite early. But when you start looking at our degree day accumulations, these hot days we're having, that's pushing the season. So it's advancing quite a bit. Well, those are my only 2 slides that I wanted to show, but I know we have some questions here. So I'm going to take the first question: what does it cost to treat an ash tree? And again, I'm hoping that call's coming in from somewhere in Minnehaha or Lincoln County, because those are the two counties that were really recommending treatment. And that's following the protocol that's been in place for a long, long, long time, that you only want to treat if the insect has been confirmed in your county or within 15 miles of your tree. So you're probably safe in both those counties to begin treating now, or to continue treating. If you're in Sioux Falls, it's an absolute must. If you have an ash tree and you like it, you should be having it treated. Now, notice my phrasing, you should be having it treated. I've been getting a number of calls from people saying, well, you know, I've gone on the internet, that great place for a lot of good and bad information. And we want to do it ourselves. And unless it's a very small tree, you know, one that you can literally put your hand around, most of the stuff that you can legally buy really doesn't work because it's too diluted. Now, note my phrase, legally buy. It seems like you can buy just about anything on the internet. I'm amazed, apparently, what you can buy, but some of those chemicals are for commercial applicators only. And so if you don't have a commercial applicator's license, you should not be using those, despite the fact that you may be able to buy them off the internet. In fact, before you buy anything off the internet, I would go to the label and look and see if it is a restricted use pesticide. Because unfortunately, those seem to be becoming more available on the internet. And those you should not be buying without a pesticide applicator's license. And that's a good law, seriously, because they are more concentrated. They have more environmental impact if they're not used properly, and they create a greater risk to the applicator. So for good reasons, we do have those laws in place, and I would strongly advise, in fact, I would require, since I'm extension, no, don't be using them if they're restricted use. So let's go to the heart of the question. How much would it cost if you're hiring someone to treat your ash tree? And again, the costs do vary, but if you look at about $10 a diameter inch, and we measure that at about chest high, roughly that. And so if you say, well, the diameter of my tree is 10 inches, for example, 10 times 10, I can do that in my head. You're going to pay about $100, and you're going to pay that about every other year for the next 10 years. And then after that, you'll be able to cut back on the applications quite a bit. And I would not go into it without really looking at, I'm going to treat this every other year for the next 10 years. So that $100, multiply that times 5, and now you're at $500. Now, $500 still is not a lot of money to spend on a nice looking ash tree. The nice looking large ash trees, those are about 20 inches in diameter. Yeah, those are worth keeping if they're healthy trees otherwise. But now you're looking at $200 an application, or about $1,000 for the next 10 years. And again, that tree might be providing you with valuable shade, and certainly the cost of removal has to be considered. And that can certainly be more than $1,000. So I'm really in the camp of, we do need to be treating some of these ash trees. We don't want to remove them all. Some of them are very valuable for the landscape, and it's worth it to hire a commercial applicator. And when I say $10, I mean roughly $10. You might find for your particular tree, you're spending $14 an inch to get an applicator. Why? Because they have to drive a little farther to your tree, and there's no other ash nearby that they're treating. Some of you might say, well, I'm only spending $7 diameter inch. Why? The applicator is doing a number of trees in your property, or they're doing a number of trees in the neighborhoods. And so they can reduce their costs, but $10 is kind of a good ballpark for you to figure out whether or not you want to do it. Now, I did see a vole question, and I think the vole question was more for veggies, but let me also mention they are really tough on young shelter belts. And I've gone out and looked at a number of shelter belts of little cedar trees, and the cedar trees are turning completely brown. And I go out there and they say, well, why are my trees turning brown? And I look at the base, and they've been gnawed all the way around by voles. And so one of the things that people really need to do is mow between the strips. Now this year that's easy. The grass hasn't grown very high, but you want to go into winter with that grass down to nothing, because one of the things voles need, because everything likes to eat a vole, is hiding cover. And if you remove all those grasses around the base of your young trees, and if you mow the strips between your trees, you've just removed a lot of hiding cover for the voles. And that's kind of critical for vole management. I will say that there's also bait stations that are available for this fall when you're trying to protect your trees. The bait stations are kind of like roach motels. They go in, they don't come out. But I really suggest that as opposed to scattering baits. If you scatter the bait, other critters can eat them, and with unintended consequences. And plus, a dead vole lying out there may be prone to having something eat it, which could pick up the insecticide as well. So bait stations where that bait is kind of hidden, the vole comes in and the vole doesn't come out, is really the best way to manage those. But I expect this year, again, we may see more voles out there in your small tree belts, and cedars and small pines seem to be some of their favorites, mainly because they're branched to the ground. So a lot of hiding cover, and they're going to do their damage later on. So if Rhoda or Adam or that have any suggestions on vole management, for your garden, I'd have you go in now. Now I like that. My chickens aren't catching them. I've never really thought of chickens as being good vole control. In fact, I don't think I'd want to mess with a chicken that could take out voles. Dogs, I don't know. Cats, yeah. Cats will do it, but
maybe some weasels.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, right. I did have, in all seriousness, we had some vole problems, and we had a badger move in. And badger makes a big hole, and you don't mess with badgers. But pocket gophers and voles tend to disappear. So there can be some advantages to that. Hey, Rhoda, I think we got a question for both of us here.
Yes, I see that.
Question. Best time to prune fruit trees if I missed pruning early this spring? No fruit this year, young trees. I think we now have a debate. Light pruning during the summer on unstressed trees is okay by light, taking out maybe 15% of the total branches. I don't have any issues with during the summer. Those wounds close over very easily. We certainly always have risks with fire blight, so it depends on what fruit trees you're talking about. And again, I emphasize unstressed trees. Right now, we have a lot of stressed trees. So if you really don't absolutely figure you need to prune, and by the way, dead branches are always good to take off, you might want to just sit the season out rather than prune water. But what says Rhoda on that question?
Well, I agree with you. A tree, especially a young tree at this point, we want to baby it as much as we can at this point.
Yeah.
If we're having a year like several years ago where we had plenty of water, maybe, but.
Yeah, plenty of water, I'd be fine with it. Still the fire blight issue if we're trying to prune apples and pears. And oh, by the way, for everybody listening here, one of the things I do want to emphasize with trees, because I'm going around looking at a lot of dying trees, that's my summer, is that there was a real interesting research study that showed that one real hard thing on trees is wet seasons followed by dry seasons. And it makes kind of sense. And they're talking wet seasons, kind of like we had in 18 and 19. Where literally it's so wet. I mean, Corson County, for example, 30 inches of precip. That's a lot. Trees in lower areas, their root system actually declines because they're in saturated soils. In fact, gumbo saturated soils. And then you get a dry year and they really don't have the root system and they just go brown. And I've seen some belts where you can literally follow it. The little low areas where you'd say, well, that's where the water should set. So they should be doing better, but they literally were drowning for 2 years and now it's gone dry. So really the problem with South Dakota is we don't live in the averages. We live in the extremes. It's always either too hot or too cold, too wet or too dry. And so we're dying by the twos. Anything you can do to moderate that, good mulching helps for our trees and shrubs. Watering helps for everything right now. And so unless you're under extreme water restrictions, and I know a lot of communities we are, most of your problems in your garden, your fruit trees, your ornamentals, your perennials and everything is managed by a very simple means this year, and that's called water. Simple to say, not always simple to do, but I think Rhoda would agree with me on that watering is really the treatment of choice for this summer.
And John, perhaps with COVID, sprinklers are hard to come by this year. They're all sold out in rapid.
You know what? They become the toilet paper of 2021. You can't find them. Either we go from needing sump pumps and you can't find them to sprinklers and you can't find them. Again, the extreme. Hey, we did have one other question here as we're kind of wrapping up here, but it was a great question on amber maple. They said, is it becoming invasive? And so should we still plant it? It's not on the naughty list yet, but I'm in complete agreement with you that if you've got a mulch bed under amber maples, you'll have thousands of little amber maples. So some people don't mind it. It hasn't really taken over the woodlands that we have here yet, but thank you for the question. And I'm not saying don't plant it, but cautious is where you plant it, because just like cork tree and buckthorn and a number of other woody plants, it's actually one that seems to thrive in our climate, whatever the climate is. And you're absolutely right. You will get little amber maples coming up everywhere. So caution, I guess, going forward with planting it. Unfortunately, you want the seeds because we do have some cultivars that the color is from the seed. So thank you for that question and a reminder on its invasive. And you asked, is there something else that could be planted instead for a small tree? Depending on where you're at, tall shrubs work well. Nannyberry viburnum, which is actually native to South Dakota, can work. So you might want to consider a tall shrub rather than a small tree. And that was one that is done well, again, depending on your site, but nannyberry does have interesting fruit, which is edible despite the name. And it might be one to consider. So I'll close from my end, Rhoda. We're kind of getting to the end, so take it away.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Want to close tonight with reminding that you can contact the SDSU Extension Hotline with questions either for Garden Hour or throughout the week. If a question came up that you didn't get answered tonight, or you thought about as soon as you left the show and thought, well, I should have typed that in, you can contact the garden hotlines in any of the 3 regional centers. You can email them. You can call the phone number. You can go here at the bottom, extension sdstate.edu, garden /yard or garden -yard, and pick the problems and solutions in the drop-down menu. And that will also call up the same information. So all these are options for getting your questions answered. I want to extend a thank you tonight to our panelists with Adam and Christina, who's had to leave us a little bit early, and John. So we also thank you for joining us tonight. We hope to see you next week. And again, if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to contact any of the garden hotlines. Hope you have a good week. Get out there and get your watering hose out and start watering. Thank you.